There is a nightmare scenario that FIFA has never wanted to talk about publicly. A scenario so damaging, so structurally threatening to the entire business of international football, that the organization has spent decades building legal walls, financial traps, and regulatory weapons specifically designed from preventing it from ever happening. That scenario has a name. It is called a coordinated boycott. And right now, with 7 days to go before the 2026 World Cup kicks off in Mexico City, the calls for exactly that are louder, wider, and more serious than anything this sport has faced in the modern era. FIFA is not panicking publicly, but make no mistake, behind the confident press releases and the carefully managed appearances, the organization is watching something it spent years trying to avoid move closer and closer to the edge of reality. Let's start with the man who, more than almost anyone alive, understands what FIFA fears most, because his name alone is extraordinary in this context. Sepp Blatter ran FIFA for 17 years. He hosted World Cups in South Africa, in Brazil, in Russia, and helped engineer the award to Qatar. He has been at the center of more football controversies than perhaps any single figure in the sport's history. And in January of this year, Sepp Blatter went on social media and told fans to avoid the United States. Not to reconsider their travel plans, not to be cautious, to avoid the country hosting the tournament. His words were a direct endorsement of calls from a Swiss anti-corruption lawyer who had previously worked inside FIFA itself, a man who cited the fatal shooting of an unarmed woman by an American immigration enforcement officer in Minneapolis as a central reason for urging fans not to travel. Blatter agreed, publicly, loudly, irreversibly. The man who built the modern World Cup was telling the world to stay away from it. If you want to follow every development in this story, from this moment all the way to the final whistle at MetLife Stadium on July 19th, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. We're covering every layer of this tournament, and the layers run deeper than anything this sport has seen in a generation. But Blatter's voice, as remarkable as it was only the most famous in a chorus that had been building for months. On January 6th, a group of 25 British members of Parliament formally tabled a motion calling for global sporting authorities to consider excluding the United States from hosting the 2026 World Cup until it demonstrated compliance with international law. In the Netherlands, 163,000 people signed a petition demanding the Dutch national team withdraw. The hashtag Boycott Orange USA trended across the country. Fans at Bundesliga matches in Germany filled stadium stands with chants of Boycott Trump Cup, loud enough for television microphones to carry clearly into living rooms across Europe. A senior vice president of the German Football Association publicly compared the moral stakes of attending this World Cup to the political calculus of the 1980 Cold War Olympic boycotts. A French parliamentarian warned that participation legitimized policies dismantling international human rights standards. A Spanish government official raised the possibility of withdrawal. And on social media, the hashtag Boycott World Cup exploded across every major platform. Thousands of posts on Instagram, Reddit, Facebook, and beyond criticized FIFA's posture as money-hungry, its governance as captured, and its alignment with the host nation's administration as a betrayal of the values the organization claims to represent. The deeper you look at why the boycott calls have exploded, the more you realize this is not one movement. It is at least 4 separate movements, each with its own moral logic, each feeding the others.
The first movement is geopolitical. Trump's threats to annex Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally, triggered immediate, visceral anger across Europe. Denmark's own foreign minister suggested withdrawal could be considered if tensions escalated. Germany's political establishment debated it as a last resort. The Netherlands public mobilized at a scale that caught everyone off guard. The connecting thread was a simple, powerful question. Can a democratic nation in good conscience send its football team to a World Cup hosted by a government that is threatening to forcibly acquire the territory of a close ally? And that's where things became even more complicated. The second movement is a human rights movement. 2 people were killed by American immigration enforcement officers in Minneapolis in January of this year. Those deaths, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, became rallying points that went far beyond immigration policy debates. Human rights organizations issued formal travel alerts for Florida and other American host states, warning of risks of arbitrary detention for visitors. Amnesty International warned that without urgent safeguards, the tournament risked becoming a threat to fans and communities alike. The American Civil Liberties Union described this moment as perhaps the most serious human rights period in the United States since the Civil Rights Movement. Against that backdrop, the question being asked was not abstract, it was immediate and personal. Is it safe to come? And for fans from dozens of countries caught in travel bans, visa bond requirements, and immigration enforcement crackdowns, the answer was coming back negative. The third movement is African, and it carries a historical weight that neither FIFA nor the American government can simply dismiss. 9 African nations qualified for this World Cup: Morocco, Senegal, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Cape Verde, South Africa. A growing, coordinated voice across the continent argued that all 9 should stay home together. The argument invoked 1976, when more than 20 African nations walked away from the Montreal Olympics rather than legitimize apartheid South Africa's presence. Those nations paid an enormous price. World record holders forfeited their greatest moment, but they concluded that participation would have given comfort to a regime the world should be condemning. The parallel being drawn to 2026, the visa bonds, the travel bans, the immigration enforcement was explicit, deliberate, and for many African football leaders, deeply personal. The fourth movement is the one FIFA fears most, technically, because it is the one being driven by elected officials in democratic countries who have the institutional authority to force the conversation into government chambers rather than just social media feeds. Subscribe now if you want to stay with this story every step of the way. We are not going anywhere, and neither is this crisis. But here is the weapon FIFA has been quietly relying on throughout all of this, the weapon that most fans have never heard of, and it is a formidable one. FIFA's own regulations governing the 2026 tournament state in explicit terms that if a participating federation withdraws or is excluded from the competition, FIFA may take whatever action it deems necessary, including replacing that nation with another qualified team. But the regulations go much further than simple replacement. As one sports business expert with decades of experience advising football organizations explained, a country that boycotts the World Cup faces not just removal from this tournament. FIFA can ban its national teams from future competitions, all of them: men's and women's World Cups, Confederation Championships, age group tournaments, youth football, the full spectrum of international competition. It can cut the federation off from FIFA funding entirely, and it can pursue legal liability claims for breach of commercial obligations because broadcasting contracts, sponsorship agreements, and commercial partnerships all depend on the participation of specific major nations. If Spain boycotts, for example, the knock-on legal and financial exposure for the Spanish Federation would be catastrophic.
That is the cage FIFA built. It is real, it is legally enforceable, and it has worked, so far, in keeping every major federation from crossing the line from rhetoric to action. But there is something happening that even that cage cannot fully contain, and that is the damage being done to FIFA's own authority and credibility by the way it has responded, or failed to respond, to this crisis. FIFA controversially awarded the sitting American president a symbolic peace prize at the World Cup draw ceremony in December. FIFA's president publicly promised that the world would be welcome to the United States, a promise he made while standing next to the man whose immigration policies were actively preventing large parts of the world from entering. FIFA resisted calls to sanction Russia before and after its invasion of Ukraine for years, ultimately restoring the country to international competition while the war continued. FIFA dismissed the Qatar human rights concerns until the commercial machinery was too far advanced to reverse. The pattern critics point to is consistent. FIFA's moral positions track its commercial interests with remarkable precision. And that consistency, that pattern, is precisely why the boycott calls have not faded even as the tournament approaches, because what fans across Europe, Africa, South America, and the Middle East are reacting to is not just this tournament. They are reacting to an accumulated sense that FIFA has become an institution that uses the language of unity and universal values while making decisions driven entirely by money and political alignment. The boycott calls are not just about 2026. They are a verdict on years of governance. No federation has officially withdrawn. As of this writing, all 48 qualified nations are expected to compete. The tournament will kick off in 7 days at the Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. The goals will be scored, the drama will unfold, and a champion will be crowned at MetLife Stadium on July 19th. But the fact that the most serious, widespread, multi-continental boycott movement in the modern history of international football erupted around this specific tournament, hosted in this specific country, at this specific political moment, has already changed something permanent. It has revealed the limits of FIFA's authority in a world where governments, fan groups, elected officials, and former FIFA presidents themselves are willing to publicly call the organization's bluff. The tournament begins in 7 days. The boycott calls have not stopped. And the question that will define this sport's governance for the next decade is not who lifts the trophy in July. It is whether FIFA can continue to claim that the World Cup belongs to the world, when so much of the world spent the months before it fighting simply to be allowed inside the door.